Okay, it should be in streaming.
And we're live. I'm going to do this.
See you later. Okay, it should be in streaming.
Yep. And we're live. I'm going to do this.
Do you know this yourself?
See you later. Okay, it should be.
Okay, everybody, we will get started with our Q&A here in just a couple of minutes. All right, welcome everybody. I hope that you enjoyed the movie. We are live now with the director, Tom Shepard, and Chanel Haley from Georgia Equality, who are going to join us in a conversation about the film that you just saw. My name is Craig, and I'm with Out on Film, and we are thrilled to be hosting this series with Georgia Equality, and we are thrilled that we could have Tom Shepard here with us tonight to talk about the film. So I am actually going to turn this over to Chanel to facilitate this conversation, and I hope that you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. So I hope everybody enjoyed the film. I really did, which is why I wanted to step to the plate for Georgia Equality and wanted to moderate, because it was a great inside look that I had never experienced, certainly myself, and then didn't really know much about. And so I'm honored to sit here and talk to you, Tom, director of the film. And obviously, I think the first thing we need to just go ahead and ask you is, what was your motivation about even wanting to create the documentary and open people's eyes about something that most of us don't know about?
Thank you, Chanel, for having me and for showing the film tonight. So I started researching this project back in 2014 and was basically volunteering for a refugee resettlement organization where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, Jewish Family and Community Services. And during that time, LGBTQ rights, certainly in the United States, but also in most Western countries, was accelerating pretty quickly. And, we had marriage equality that was sort of steamrolling its way to the Supreme Court, soon to be law of the land. I live in San Francisco. Most of my friends are fairly progressive and I would say educated. And I don't think one of them could tell you how a refugee was resettled or, even the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker. So I think we wondered, could this be a moment in which we could get this conversation amplified a little bit more? And the truth is, at that time, the State Department under Secretary of State Clinton had given a fairly substantial grant for the first time in the US to this agency to resettle queer refugees. So it felt like kind of the right moment to tell the story. And 4 or 5 years later, here we are.
So you actually just touched on my, I thought a really important follow-up question was, can you explain to our viewers what the difference is between an asylum seeker and a refugee?
Yeah. Thank you. So the two folks who were resettled from Syria and Congo, Subis and Junior, were both refugees. So they basically had to make their case for asylum outside of the US through the United Nations. They fled their home countries and then went to countries of transit, connected with a United Nations office. And once they were conferred, then they were connected to refugee resettlement organizations in the US. And refugees, when they get here, they get a sort of stipend for living. It's only about $350 a month, but they get that for about 8 months, and they get food stamps, and they get access to medical care. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, get nothing. And basically they have to cross into the United States somehow, like either on a tourist visa or a student visa, or you hear many stories of people migrating from Central America up through Mexico and trying to get in on the southern border to connect with the customs office. Once you're in the US, you have the right to be able to apply for asylum through our own immigration courts that are run by Homeland Security. And that's what you saw with Cheyenne and Marie's story over really about 2 or 3 years as they had to adjudicate their asylum claim and make their case here in the US.
So would it be safe to say the short version is asylum is refugee is pre-approved, asylum is approved? It's kind of that it's about the process, right? About what it takes to get to one, the other.
That's right. It's about the process and where that process happens.
I have several more questions, but before I just jump into my questions, Craig, are there anybody that has questions that's already been posted?
One question that just came through is how long did it take you to make this film?
So that's a great question. We started at the end of 2014. I met most of the subjects at that time. Cheyenne and Marie had just come into the country, and we premiered the film at the San Francisco International Film Festival last April, and literally we're working up until the week before that festival. So it was a good 4 or 5 year project. And there's some challenges to that, obviously, but I think there are some benefits. And one of them is that, most of the folks, as you saw in the film, who are coming here, who are queer or LGBTQ, have experienced pretty intense trauma, if not torture. So the idea of kind of shoving cameras in their faces right when they get here is a little bit of a delicate prospect. And so I think having time to kind of develop trust with them, develop rapport, get to know them, have them get to know me and sort of see okay, what are your intentions with this story? What are you planning to do? I think that actually served all of us. But I got to say, there are very few LGBTQ refugees who are willing to go on camera, especially right after they've arrived in the country, just given what a delicate moment that is, how precarious their situation is. So these folks that we worked with are fearless, and their kind of resiliency really, really inspired our whole team.
Question about the very first scene. Was that actually Junior that was being taunted there, or was that just some B-roll, some roll that you got from somewhere else?
It was that. It was some B-roll, and we did have some access to home footage and archival footage of Junior when he was in Cape Town, South Africa, that you see a little bit later in the film. But we actually didn't have any footage of him in Kinshasa, where he's from originally.
So I know that you actually live in San Francisco, and this all took place when they were in San Francisco. And I remember the dialogue that happened between Subis and Fred, his refugee sponsor, and he was asking him about nightlife and being able to go out and everything. And the way that Subis, and also the way Marie and Cheyenne, they had these dreams about when I get to America, that I'm safe and this is great and I can hold hands and do this, but not recognizing, or do they know now, that the reaction is very different in the rest of the United States than it is in San Francisco?
Yes.
This would be that they learn throughout the process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great question. And actually, it's not an accident that the State Department picked San Francisco as the place where its sort of first wave of LGBTQ refugees would go. And a lot of asylum seekers try and get to San Francisco or New York or DC area. And they also think that the asylum officers might be more educated regarding queer issues in those cities. So if they're going to apply for asylum, they want to be in the most sort of enlightened areas. But I think what they didn't necessarily think through is, try living on a refugee benefit in the Bay Area of $335 a month for 8 months. It's like teachers can't afford to live in San Francisco now. Firefighters can't afford to live there. I mean, the character of San Francisco has changed dramatically since I moved there. I grew up in a very conservative town, Colorado Springs. Not so easy to be gay in that town. And I essentially fled within the United States. Now, my story isn't anything like the 4 that we covered, but at that time, San Francisco's kind of being an emerald city and a place where I could live affordably in the mission and kind of find my tribe as a gay man and as a documentary filmmaker, it was really manageable then. But it's a completely different story today. And I think our film, turned a little bit and focused more on some of those issues of class and race and how do you survive when the cost of living has become almost unbearable for most people there. And that, as you saw in the film, became a kind of central theme. And I think it sort of begs a question. Are places like San Francisco and New York really sanctuary cities? Are they really cities of refuge anymore when they're pretty unreachable for most of the population?
I'm glad you actually brought up the class and race, because something that stood out to me, and I don't know if you did this intentionally and wanted us to get it on our own, or if it was just the way it fell, but kind of the connection, relationship, and opportunities that came about for Subi versus Junior. And when Subi got there, they had a host home. A job immediately came about, got to speak into the UN, versus Junior had more of a struggle, seems like, and a lot more judgment that came along with that too. And I would think, because I know in America, typically with a person, especially living with HIV, they actually are a lot of more resources that can come along just for that alone. And so I was just curious to know, did you notice that? And also pointing out that I remember in there that Junior said, or actually Junior's Unitarian volunteer, which was Gallon, said that, Junior thinks that they can just come there and get a job working in a nonprofit and it's gonna be that easy. But it certainly was that easy for Subi.
No, you're raising a really good point. And of course we were aware of those issues. And I think they become even more striking when you see the stories sort of lined up, right against one another. And, Subi's story is much less typical of queer refugees. I mean, the fact that he was invited like 3 months after he had arrived to go speak before the United Nations Security Council and, really had a cadre of people around him who are helping. I think, to be honest, Junior's story is much more typical of the queer refugee journey in terms of migration. And if you talk to people, scholars who sort of work on this issue and really look at the narratives of queer refugees, his is much more typical. And he talks about this a lot. Like, he's dark-skinned, he's HIV positive, he's gender non-conforming. There are a lot of ways in which he is targeted, I think, in American society. And even in a place like San Francisco, he would tell you that he felt like even riding on the Muni bus, he would get sort of side-eyed by people. And so I think what we wanted to do was really try and place ourselves in the shoes of each of their experiences. Then you have the experience of Shaina Marie, who are women. It is very rare for women in some of the cultures where they come from to even, like, they're supposed to get permission from their father or their uncle or a man to even be able to leave the country. So for these women to kind of have the wherewithal to have this loving relationship and then make their way to the US on their own and then go through the whole process. So as hard as it is, for refugees, as I was saying before, it's even harder for asylum seekers, and I think doubly hard for women.
Thank you for that context. Craig, do we have anybody else with any question?
I do. I have one question for Tom. After having gone through this with people and these stories that are just heart-wrenching, how do you process it once everything's complete? And what do you do with all of these feelings?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think, my film partner, Jen Gilliman, who is my co-producer, and our whole team are just, deeply feeling an empathetic person. And I thought about it, particularly in those first few months, because all of them, as they describe it, had real significant trauma. And we are about the age, that their parents were at the time that they were dealing with these family dynamics. And so it made me wonder sometimes, as we were asking them to sort of dredge up some of those difficult feelings, if there wasn't some sort of transference, because we're of course wanting to really listen and see and hold some of those feelings. So, there were a number of nights that we'd go home after shooting and just have a lot of emotions, and we could share with each other those experiences. But this is something that's sort of fundamental about this story, is that the refugee resettlement model in this country has always historically been based on families, right? You have a family that flees a war-torn region of Iraq, and if they come to the Bay Area where I live, they're immediately like connected to the diaspora of like Iraqi Americans. Maybe it's a community center or a mosque or a grocery store. So it's not easy, but there are some immediate sort of footholds that are there because of the way the model works. If you're a gay Iraqi guy, it's quite possible that the last people you might want to see when you get here to the US are other Iraqis or Iraqi Americans, because you're fearful you're going to experience the same harassment or even torture that you experience back home. So what we found with all of these folks is that there was this sort of deep family rupture that had happened, and the people that would normally sort of help through these really difficult transitions were not there because they were fleeing from their family, not with their family.
Is mental health part of the program? Do they all get mental health, get counseling to be able to cope?
It's a great question. And when when we first started, there were not many resources, and there were not many ways that they were being connected into therapy. And I think that that's really changed. And I think people see that that's almost like as important as finding a place to live, or helping like find a job, is some real support for a lot of the PTSD.
I wanted to make sure that we talked about the host and hosting or host homes. How does one be able to do that? Why do some get it and some do not? Is this a program that we as viewers who this touches us, we want to sign up for this now? Is that something we can do?
Yes, and I'm sorry about the telephone ringing in the background. Yes, in fact, there's the network of support and volunteerism in the Bay Area has really increased. So the number, I was told, particularly the year after Trump was elected, that the number of donations to Jewish Family and Community Services had gone way up. They were much more able to find people willing to host, but also volunteers who just would like spend time with these folks who were pretty lonely and just like connect with them socially, maybe bring them to the DMV for the first time, that sort of thing. There are many opportunities for that. And I really encourage people, one place where you can see some resources is our website at unsettled.film. And we've sort of listed all the partner organizations that we've worked with over the years. That's just a starting point. But once you sort of drill into that, you see that there are a number of organizations. Many of them are religious organizations that have traditionally worked with refugees, where you can become a volunteer. But I mean, the irony, Chanel, is that while everything has sort of built up, the Trump administration has really cut the number of refugees allowed now in the US by 80% since we started the film. It's an all-time low now. So whereas the US used to be sort of noted as a kind of real beacon in terms of refugee resettlement, that has changed dramatically since Donald Trump has been in office.
Yeah, my research showed that America was number 2 behind Canada for refugees in the world. And then you gave us some stats in the beginning about during the Obama years and how many people were coming in. I wasn't also, was it intentional? Because you mentioned in there the stats around out of 70 countries outlaw being gay, and 4 of them have a penalty for death. Was it intentional that you picked someone that was from those countries to where this was literally a life or death situation for them?
That's a good question. And actually those statistics have changed since we finished the film a year ago. So it's actually 7 countries now that employ the death penalty if you're gay or trans in that country. So, and in fact, there are other countries where regions, they will behead you or kill you for being queer. So the numbers change a little bit, but no, I mean, as I told you, I think who we connected with and who was willing to share their story was largely contingent on them. And so I mean, it was more important that we were building a relationship with someone who was willing to kind of tell their story and also to, you know, stay with the project over a period of, you know, 2, 3 or more years. So I think those were maybe more the determining factors than the countries where they were originally from.
Hey, Craig, we got any more questions?
We do. And Tom, have you been able to keep up with them, and do you know kind of how they're doing and what they're doing now?
I do. In fact, they're very active right now. The film is going to be broadcasting at the end of this month on public television. And so we're doing some events very much like this one that Chanel is moderating. And so it's great. I mean, they're the best spokespeople for the film. Cheyenne and Marie, as you saw in the card, moved to Vegas after they got their asylum status. I think they were probably tired of spending like more than 70% of their income on like rent in the Bay Area, and they wanted their own place. And they also wanted a space where they could really get back to working on their music. And Cheyenne has just written and recorded an amazing song. It gives me like goosebumps. We've actually played it at some of the film festivals. So, you know, if people are interested in connecting with them about their music, they can, you know, reach out on Film or through our website, and we'll put you in touch with them. And Subi is living in San Francisco, and he's living in a group house. And, you know, he talks about, you were talking about this a little bit, Chanel, like he had this sort of quick rise in sort of stature and almost became a sort of poster boy for refugee rights very quickly. And because of that, everybody was like wanting him, like wanting his attention, you know, refugees were reaching out to him, or people in Syria who were going through horrible things saying, how can I do what you do? And, you know, nonprofits were wanting to capture his attention to, you know, do public service announcements. And, you know, the media wanted, like he had become like a media person. So I think when I've talked to him lately, he's like, I just kind of want to have a normal life. And I think he's got a you know, a really great living situation, and he's found another job. And Junior, I just spoke with Junior in the last weeks, and I know he's still struggling, and he got a public housing assignment, but that's coming to an end. And it's interesting because I've talked to him a lot over the years about Atlanta, because he's told me that that's a place where he could imagine living, that there's a much stronger Congolese community. And he thinks that, you know, it would be maybe much more affordable than this constant battle that he faces being in San Francisco. But like I said, there are a few people that I've met who have a kind of resiliency that Junior has in terms of like, you know, keep on. So, but thanks for that question.
Just so you know, you can tell Junior, we have an issue with public housing here also. So don't think it's always greener on the other side necessarily. But I wanted to, before we wrap up with the last question, we noticed in the towards the end that Subi's sister joined them. And have you spoken to his sister? Are they still connected? Is she still in San Francisco? What's going on there with that relationship, and how's she doing? Did she get her?
I had a chance to meet Subi's sister Rawan in Beirut when we went to film in Lebanon, and she was kind of in transition at that point, you know, with refugee status, and it was really meaningful. I went twice to Canada, once when we filmed The Reunion when she was resettled in Vancouver, and once some months later to show her the film before we screened it at the festival. And I don't know, to me, it was like, I couldn't really imagine any other way to end the film, especially talking about this idea of sort of family and family rupture and what happens to refugees who are having to sort of leave family behind. I mean, most Americans don't have to make that decision in their life. There's a lot of struggle here, but they're not going to make the decision like, I have to leave my country and I can never come back. And so for the two of them to meet, and for Subi to be able to almost reach into those experiences that he had done a few years before and bring that to his sister, was just so heartwarming for all of us. And I'm happy to say that she's doing really well. I mean, she, like Subi, is extremely smart, and I think is thriving. And also, in no small part, because Canada does a really good job with their refugee resettlement program, and she's had access to a lot of resources in Vancouver that in some ways are much easier than someone who might come to San Francisco.
Okay. I think we might have just enough time for one final question, Craig.
Okay. So Tom, if people want to buy a copy of this film, or do you have plans for distribution? Or I know you're going to be on public broadcasting later this month, but how can people recommend and find and purchase this film?
That's great. Thank you. So the film's going to be broadcasting nationally on June 28th, which is Sunday, and it's 10 p.m. Eastern time, I think 7 p.m. West Coast time, and it's on World Channel. So if you find World Channel on your public television station or on your cable lineup, you can watch it then, and then it will be streaming on worldchannel.org and pbs.org for 2 weeks after that. So that's a great place to see the film and see it for free, and it'll be widely available. And then beyond that, we're doing education distribution with a great organization called Good Docs. So anybody who might want to purchase the film and show it to their students or community groups or churches or refugee organizations, please go to Good Docs. And you'll find it right away when you go on their website. You can just plug in Unsettled to their website. It's a really great distribution and impact and engagement organization for documentary films.
Excellent.
Well,
Hopefully, maybe an idea out there. Maybe, in 3 years you do a follow-up, so we'll see where they are now.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Chanel, thank you so much for moderating with all of us tonight. And as I told everybody in the meeting, this is our first event kind of being virtual. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And Tom, thank you for telling the story of these people. And these are stories we probably never would have known, and we can't thank you enough for telling them and spending a good portion of your professional life following and getting their stories out there. I think it's important, especially during these times, that we hear those voices. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you including the film.
And then for everybody, we're going to be continuing this series throughout the month, partnering with Georgia Equality, so that if you go onto our Facebook page, our website, or to the event page that you went to tonight, you'll see everything that we've got coming up throughout the month of June as we recognize and commemorate LGBTQ liberation. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and hopefully we will see you again soon.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.